We got more of the same from Nebraska in 2023, and that was several close losses. In fact, this team lost their last 4 games all by 1 score. And that was the story of the Scott Frost era at Nebraska. But you feel like things are maybe going to turn there. Matt Rule, a proven coach, and the team just kind of played better last season for the most part, even though it was a disappointment going 5-7. Before we get to the game-by-game predictions, first, just some thoughts on this team. And so when we look at the roster, it's one of the more interesting teams because they're not great anywhere. Like, if you look at this entire roster, I mean, do they have any All-American potential players on their team? Maybe someone emerges, but right now you'd say probably not. But they don't really have any weaknesses either. They're just a solid team. I mean, they have pretty good players across the board. Depth is not a major concern. So it's an interesting team here with Nebraska. It's one of those teams where you would expect them to probably beat the bottom teams in the conference and lose to the better teams. They're just kind of right there in the middle. That's how I see this Nebraska team. And of course, it all starts with Dylan Raiola at quarterback. I believe he'll be the guy. I don't think we've heard that officially announced or anything. And it gives them an upside at the quarterback position that they have not had. And so that is why I think they have more potential this season. But again, I think it's going to be a case where, and I don't want to give away the predictions here, but I feel like it's a case where they're going to beat the bottom teams because, again, they really have no weaknesses, but they're not talented enough or good enough to beat the elite teams, the top teams in the conference. So let's get to the game-by-game predictions. We'll start with Vegas here. Vegas actually has them at the over-under at 7.5. And again, this is a 5-7 team last year. Their schedule's pretty favorable, especially the first half or so. It really sets up well for Nebraska. Now, the last part of the schedule is very, very tough, but it's definitely interesting the way their schedule plays out. But yeah, Vegas thinks this team is a 7-5, 8-4 type team. And again, with this schedule, I kind of agree with that. They should be better than most of the teams that they play this season. I think UTEP week 1, that should be a win. So I've got them starting 1-0. And then you've got Colorado on September 7th. This is a tough one to predict. I think, Colorado in certain areas is definitely better than Nebraska, but in certain areas they're worse. And again, Nebraska is just kind of even across the board, whereas Colorado has some weaknesses. And you look at their run game, how good is it going to be? You look at the offensive line. Defense, I think, actually going to be better than people expect for Colorado this season, but maybe not great. And so for Nebraska, again, you don't really have any of those concerns. It's a tough one to predict. This is probably one of the tougher games. You look at the secondary for Nebraska. Can they slow down the Colorado passing attack? I think that's going to be a problem, but I think Nebraska will have an advantage up front. I think their defensive line can win against Colorado's offensive line. And so it's just, it's one that could go either way. It's so close. I was so torn on this game. It really came down to the revenge factor for Nebraska after losing last year and home field advantage. So I think those two things play a big key in this one, and Nebraska goes out and they win. I think they beat Northern Iowa as well. So a 3-0 start here for the Cornhuskers. They play Illinois on a Friday night, September 20th at home. Just not very high on this Illinois team. I think I've said before that this is probably the worst team in the Big Ten this year. And so Nebraska, again, they should not lose a game like this, especially at home. I think they beat Illinois. Now, in the past with Scott Frost, and even last year, we saw this team lose to these types of teams in close games. Michigan State was not very good last year. They lost to them. But for the most part, they did take care of business. They beat Illinois by a couple of scores last year. They beat Purdue pretty easily, and I think they'll beat Purdue again this year, even on the road. Nebraska is the better team. They don't really have, again, any weaknesses that I think Purdue can exploit. And, yeah, it'll be on the road, but I think Nebraska will do just fine. And, it's not necessarily – I would say it's not one of the toughest places to play, although we have seen a lot of teams go in there and lose. So I'm not going to say it's an easy place to play. But Nebraska beats Purdue. Then they get Rutgers on October 5th. A defensive battle here for sure. Don't really see a ton of points in this game. Can Dylan Raiola, can he make some plays against this Rutgers defense? I like the Nebraska defense mostly because they're playing at home, and I think they have more options on offense. I think the passing game with Raiola will be better. The run game should still be good. So I don't know if Rutgers is really able to score much in this game. I think Nebraska can score enough. to win. All of a sudden, they're at 6-0. They get a bye week before we're going on the road to face Indiana. This is an Indiana team that I think is going to be better than people expect. I really think they're going to bounce back this year and be an improved team, potentially a bowl team. I don't think they're going to be a great team. It's a tough one here. I could see Indiana possibly pulling off the upset. But again, I just think Nebraska is so solid across the board. I think Matt Rule in year 2 is going to have this team focused and prepared, and they'll win these types of games that maybe they would have lost in the past. I've got them beating Indiana on the road. So a win over Indiana, and all of a sudden, yeah, now it's 7-0. A 7-0 record. And I think this is very possible, very realistic for Nebraska. Again, you look at these teams that they're going to be facing, I believe, will be favored in every game that they play in these first 7 games. But then the schedule gets a lot tougher. They play Ohio State on October 26th on the road. And I think it's kind of, you go from winning these games against bad teams to, or I don't want to say bad, but average to bad teams. And then you see them when they finally play a really good team. I think it's going to be a problem for Nebraska. I really don't think they'll compete at all. I think Ohio State will blow them out. And so, yeah, they'll be 7-0, maybe ranked, maybe getting some hype. This game could be hyped up, maybe 2 undefeated teams, who knows. And then, yeah, Ohio State just blows them out. That's just how I see it playing out. Can they bounce back the next week? It'll be against UCLA on November 2nd. A UCLA team that I think people have just kind of written off and said, no, this is the coaching change and all that, they're going to be terrible. I still think there's enough talent on this team, enough production coming back to where they can be decent. So this is actually one that I think could go either way, but I think home field advantage might be the difference. Dylan Raiola, you would think that he would be playing pretty good football by this point if he can even come close to living up to the hype. So I think Nebraska is able to win, but I think it's close. I think this game much closer than maybe the experts would predict. Then they get a bye week before going on the road to face USC, and it's kind of like the Ohio State game. Now, USC's not top to bottom as talented as Ohio State, so Nebraska should be more competitive in this game, but I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with the high-powered offense of USC. So I think USC wins. Again, pretty close. I don't think it's like the Ohio State game, but I really just don't see Nebraska winning this game. So they lose that. Then they go face Wisconsin at home next on November 23rd. A Wisconsin team that I think is just a little bit ahead of Nebraska right now. Not by a lot. I think this will be a competitive, close game. But I like Wisconsin this year to be a very solid team. And again, if Tyler Van Dyke can get back to what he has been in the past at times at Miami, this offense should be really good for Wisconsin. And so I like the Badgers to win a close one here. And then finally, they close things out with Iowa Friday after Thanksgiving, November 29th on the road. Really, really good defense for Iowa. Not a great offense. At least that's what I'm expecting. So I think Nebraska's defense will keep them in this game, and they'll give them a chance. But I just think this Iowa defense is going to be very, very good once again. I think Nebraska maybe makes a couple of turnovers. They're playing on the road. Very tough place to play. Iowa wins a close, low-scoring game. And Nebraska finishes 8-4. So a better season. And I think you're going to start to see this program headed in the right direction. A favorable schedule, especially in those first 7 games. So I think they can get to 8-4. I really do. If they lose another game, it's probably going to be Colorado or maybe Indiana. But I really don't see them beating Ohio State or USC on the road. Wisconsin, Iowa, maybe they could beat, but I'm not going to pick it. So I've got them at 8-4. I think they can absolutely get there. Maybe 7-5. But again, my prediction is 8-4. What's your prediction? Give me your thoughts on this team down in the comments below.